The Galactic Military Academy floated like an oversized, pretentious jewelry box against the backdrop of three colliding nebulae. Because nothing said, we're training the next generation of elite warriors, quite like situating your campus against the most photogenic cosmic phenomena in the quadrant. The Academy boasted a rich tradition spanning 12,000 cycles, a fact administrators never tired of mentioning in recruitment materials, convocation speeches, and anywhere else they could wedge it in. 12,000 cycles of excellence, droned Professor Viltax, adjusting his ocular enhancers. The sixth time he'd worked the phrase into his lecture in under 20 minutes. A new record, surely. The assembled cadets, representing 73 species from across the Galactic Confederation, shifted in their ergonomically designed seats, which were supposedly calibrated for multi-species comfort, but somehow managed to be universally uncomfortable. The classroom was a marvel of engineering, with adaptive atmospheric controls, telepathic learning aids, and hollow projection systems so advanced they occasionally became sentient and tried to unionize. Today, Viltax continued, his secondary breathing sacs inflating with academic self-importance. We begin our annual Primitive Species Combat Analysis course, a cornerstone of your tactical education. A ripple of anticipation moved through the room. This was the course everyone had been waiting for, a chance to study lesser species and their adorably unsophisticated approaches to warfare, the military equivalent of watching toddlers attempt quantum physics. In the third row, a Zithar cadet with iridescent scales that changed color with his mood, currently a bored taupe, leaned over to his Prontillian classmate. I hope it's not the Murgles again. Last year's class got the Murgles, and their idea of warfare is throwing pointy rocks while riding giant slugs. I heard, whispered back the Prontillian, who went by click due to the sound their mandibles made, that they might use the Doraxians. At least they developed nuclear capabilities before wiping themselves out. Professor Viltax cleared all four of his throats simultaneously, an impressive feat that always silenced the room. This cycle, we will be studying a particularly fascinating case, the species designated as humans from the planet Earth. A collective groan rippled through the classroom. Oh, come on, muttered a gelatinous blurb cadet occupying 3 seats. Earth, that backwater. They haven't even achieved proper interstellar travel. Barely made it to their own moon, agreed a tall, willowy quanadarian whose ancestral trees had been spacefaring for millennia. Viltax's mouthparts twitched in what passed for a smile among his species. I understand your disappointment. However, I assure you that human warfare presents unique educational opportunities. At the back of the room, Commander Zactor, the Academy's most decorated tactical instructor, leaned against the wall. Unlike Viltax, who had never seen actual combat unless you counted the faculty parking dispute of Cycle 9876, Zactor had participated in 14 major conflicts. His carapace bore the scars of battle, and his left sensor stalk had been replaced with a cybernetic enhancement after an encounter with a Trajorian warbeast. You will find, Zactor interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a phase disruptor, that appearances can be deceiving. The cadets straightened when Zactor spoke. Even the most arrogant Academy hotshot shut up and listened. Humans, he continued, moving to the front with the fluid grace of centuries of combat training, have not yet achieved what we would consider advanced technology. Their weaponry is primitive, their strategies often rudimentary, yet they possess qualities that warrant our attention. A Heliac cadet raised a luminous appendage. Sir, my pre-academy briefing said humans are fragile carbon-based life forms with no natural defenses. No venom, no significant physical strength, no regenerative capabilities, no exoskeletons. What could we possibly learn from them? Zactor's ocular ridge rose slightly. An excellent question, cadet. Perhaps you will answer it yourself by the end of this course. Viltax, clearly annoyed at having his lecture hijacked, reclaimed control with a display of academic territoriality. As I was saying before Commander Zactor's insightful interruption, we will begin with an overview of human history, focusing specifically on their military conflicts. The main hollow projector hummed to life, displaying a slowly rotating image of Earth. A rather unremarkable Class M planet, Viltax narrated, approximately 12,756 kilometers in diameter, one large moon, primarily nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, surface 70% covered in dihydrogen monoxide. They live in liquid, asked a desert-evolved Sandar cadet, horrified. Near it mostly, Viltax clarified, though they do occasionally immerse themselves in it voluntarily for what they call recreation. Several cadets shuddered. Humans have been engaging in organized warfare for approximately 10,000 of their solar orbits, roughly 3,000 galactic standard cycles. Their technological progression has been irregular. The Hollow shifted to a timeline of human weapons development. Note how they spent nearly 5,000 years using essentially the same technology, sharpened metal objects and rudimentary projectile weapons, before suddenly accelerating their development in the last 300 years. A Quidian cadet with hypersensitive empathic abilities raised a tendril. Professor, I'm detecting unusual emotional patterns from both you and Commander Zactor when discussing these humans. There's an undercurrent of respect, perhaps concern. The room fell silent. Viltax's secondary eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of discomfort. Your empathic abilities are impressive, cadet, Zactor interjected smoothly, but perhaps prematurely deployed. Reserve judgment until you've seen the evidence. The hollow display shifted, showing a rotating selection of Earth's military leaders throughout history. We will begin our analysis tomorrow with what humans call their First World War, Viltax announced. I suggest you all review the preliminary materials on human physiology and planetary conditions. You may find it enlightening. As the cadets filed out, animated discussions broke out. This is ridiculous, huffed a mechanoid cadet, whose partially organic brain was housed in a precision-engineered body. What could these humans possibly teach us about warfare? My secondary processing unit contains tactical simulations that could outmaneuver their entire species. I don't know, mused a rare Vulcan exchange student, whose species was known for their philosophical perspective. There's something in the instructor's demeanor that suggests more than they're saying. In the now empty classroom, Zactor approached Viltax. You didn't tell them. Of course not, Viltax replied, his voice low. That would defeat the purpose of the exercise. Half of them will resign their commissions by the end of this course, Zactor predicted, his battle-scarred carapace gleaming under the artificial lights. Yes, agreed Viltax, suddenly sounding less pompous and more weary. That's precisely the point. Better to lose them now than in the field. The hollow display flickered one last time, momentarily showing an image that would have shocked the departing cadets. A human military vessel being welcomed into the Galactic Confederation's central docking bay, a diplomatic event kept classified from the general population. Tomorrow, Viltax said quietly, they begin to understand what we're really preparing them for. Zactor nodded grimly, and why half of them aren't ready for it. The next day, the classroom had been transformed into what the Academy catalog pretentiously called an immersive tactical observation chamber, but was essentially a fancy theater with seats accommodating everything from methane-breathing gas clouds to silicon-based rockoids who considered sitting down once a decade excessive leisure. The cadets filed in, many clutching data tablets displaying hastily skimmed information about Earth. Most had spent precisely 11 minutes on their assignment, the minimum needed to avoid academic probation, before returning to more pressing matters like interspecies dating apps and complaining about cafeteria food that tried to cater to 73 biochemistries and disappointed every single one. "Did you know," announced the Heliac cadet to no one in particular, "that humans have to shut down consciousness for approximately 1/3 of their day? They call it sleep, and they just stop functioning." "Inefficient," agreed the mechanoid, who required a maintenance cycle only once per lunar month, though not as bizarre as their reproduction method. "Let's not discuss that before the visual presentation," groaned a photosynthetic chlorin, whose leaves turned a nauseated purple at the thought. Professor Viltax swept into the room with Commander Zactor close behind, joined by a third instructor, Professor Icklithmore from the psychology department, a cyanid whose constantly shifting brain structure was visible through her transparent cranium. Rumor had it she could read minds, though Academy policy prohibited faculty from mentally probing students without signed consent forms in triplicate. "Today," Viltax announced, "we begin our analysis of human warfare, starting with their First World War, a conflict that engulfed much of their planet from years 1914 to 1918, according to their calendar." The lights dimmed. The blurb cadet took advantage of the darkness to extend a gelatinous pseudopod toward the snack compartment of a neighboring Traxian, who slapped it away with practiced irritation. "Observe," Viltax continued, "the state of human technology during this period." The holo display activated, showing images of early 20th century Earth technology, automobiles, biplanes, telegraphs. Several cadets snickered. "Fossil fuel combustion engines," the mechanoid cadet whispered loudly. "My personal transport pod as a juvenile was more advanced." "We get it," muttered the Zithar, scales shifting to an annoyed magenta. "You're technologically superior to a species that doesn't even know we exist. Very impressive." Commander Zactor stepped forward. "What you are about to witness has been compiled from human historical records. These are not simulations. These are actual recordings of human combat. I advise you to pay close attention to their behavior rather than their technology." The holo display shifted, and the room was filled with the sights and sounds of trench warfare. The Western Front materialized around them, a hellscape of mud, barbed wire, and destruction stretching to infinity. The immersive projection was disturbingly effective. Cadets could smell the mud, the rot, the chemical signatures of early human explosives. They watched waves of soldiers climb from trenches only to be cut down by machine gun fire, bodies piling up in no man's land. "This is inefficient," the mechanoid cadet observed, with notably less smugness. "Observe the pattern," Professor Icklithmore spoke for the first time, her brain's structure pulsing with activity. "They continue the same tactical approach despite catastrophic losses." The scenes shifted to gas attacks, soldiers clawing at their faces as their lungs blistered. Several cadets flinched. "They used chemical weapons on their own species?" asked the chlorin, shocked. Her people had an evolutionary history of chemical communication and considered weaponized chemicals taboo. "Indeed," Viltax confirmed, And note they deployed these weapons despite full awareness of the effects. This was not scientific ignorance. The projection showed field hospitals overflowing with wounded medics amputating limbs without proper sterilization, floors slick with blood. A Quidian cadet writhed in distress, their empathic tendrils retracting. "The pain signatures, they're overwhelming," they gasped. Two classmates helped them from the room. Zactor nodded to an assistant who adjusted the emotional dampening field for the remaining empathic species. 4 years, Viltax continued clinically. 4 years of this stalemate with minimal territorial changes despite millions of casualties. The display showed grim statistics. Over 9 million combatants dead, 21 million wounded, 8 million civilian casualties. "But why?" asked the Vulcaran exchange student, their philosophical tone replaced with confusion. "Why continue once the pattern of failure was established?" "An excellent question," Icklithmore replied, her brain shifting to a contemplative blue. "Humans display a remarkable capacity for both adaptation and stubborn persistence. Note that they eventually developed new tactics, tanks, aircraft coordination, infiltration techniques, but only after years of catastrophic losses." The lights rose slightly as the first segment ended. The classroom was quieter now. "Questions?" Viltax asked, seeming almost disappointed when several appendages rose. He had expected them to be too stunned to respond. "Was this their worst conflict?" asked a Draxian cadet. The instructors exchanged a grimly amused look. "No," Zactor answered, "not even close." The lights dimmed again, shifting to the Second World War. The cadets watched in mounting horror as the scale and brutality escalated. Blitzkrieg tactics, aerial bombardment of cities, submarines hunting civilian shipping. "They bomb their own dwellings," gasped a Hive species cadet who considered living spaces sacred. "Strategic targeting of civilian infrastructure to demoralize enemy populations," Viltax explained with academic detachment. The Zithar cadet's scales shifted to a sickly gray-green. "I think I'm going to be ill." "Waste extraction receptacles are under your seats," Viltax noted helpfully. The display showed the siege of Leningrad, civilians starving, consuming book bindings. 900 days, Zactor added quietly. "The siege lasted 900 days. A soft thud indicated a cadet had used the waste receptacle. The display shifted to aerial vehicles dropping cylindrical objects on 2 cities, resulting in mushroom clouds. "Their first deployments of atomic weaponry," Viltax explained. "Primitive fission devices, but the principles are the same as early-stage planetary cleansing protocols." "They used planet killers on themselves," whispered the Sandar cadet. "Scaled down, but yes," confirmed Zactor. "And they developed arsenals capable of rendering their planet uninhabitable many times over." The lights rose as the session ended. The cadets sat in stunned silence. "Your assignment," Viltax announced, oblivious to the psychological impact, "is to prepare a tactical analysis of human combat motivation patterns based on today's observations. We continue tomorrow with more recent conflicts." As the cadets filed out, their bravado had vanished. "I thought it would be funny," the blurb cadet confessed, their gelatinous form contracted. "I thought we'd laugh at their primitive weapons, but they're terrifying." "Terrifying," the mechanoid agreed, recalculating threat assessments. In the empty classroom, the instructors conferred. 17 showed significant distress, Icklithmore reported, her brain a somber purple. 8 are questioning their career choices. "Fewer than I expected," Zactor noted. Wait until tomorrow, Viltax replied, shutting down the hollow system. We haven't shown them the psychological warfare yet. Outside, the Vulcrans stared at the nebulae. They fight like that, they murmured, on a planet without atmospheric shields, with no interstellar allies, knowing how fragile they are. The Zithar, scales a thoughtful blue, nodded. And tomorrow we see worse. By the third day, attendance dropped by 12%. Empty seats formed conspicuous gaps, like missing teeth in a predator's smile. The room's atmospheric controls struggled with collective stress pheromones, creating an odor like anxiety gone sour. Today, Viltax announced, his pomposity subdued, we examine psychological warfare and modern combat methodologies. Commander Zactor stood at parade rest. Before we begin, psychological support services are available through the Academy's Wellness Center. Several cadets exchanged glances. The Wellness Center was for minor issues, not interspecies trauma. The lights dimmed. Icklithmore took the lead, her cranium pulsing red. Human conflict evolved beyond territorial or resource disputes. They developed warfare based on ideological differences, abstract concepts for which they sacrificed millions. The display showed Vietnam War jungle warfare, booby traps, guerrilla tactics, villages destroyed. Note the asymmetrical approach, Zactor pointed out. The technologically inferior force adapts to neutralize advantages. Cadets watched young human soldiers patrol, visibly terrified yet continuing. One triggered an explosive and disappeared. They send their young? Asked the Chloran, leaves trembling. Warriors begin training between ages 17 and 19, Viltax confirmed. Some as young as 16. They're not even fully developed, protested a Nerg cadet, whose species required 30 years to mature. Footage showed propaganda, leaflets, radio broadcasts to demoralize enemies. Humans discovered breaking an opponent's will could be more effective than breaking their bodies, Icklithmore observed, her brain showing admiration. Then came terrorist attacks, collapsing civilian structures, chemical weapons in residential areas. This isn't warfare, objected the mechanoid. There's no tactical advantage. Fear, Zactor said simply. The weapon is fear. The display showed psychological techniques, sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, stress positions. They understand precisely what they're doing, Icklithmore confirmed. Why prolong suffering rather than end combat efficiently? Asked the Vulcran, their philosophical demeanor eroding. The most disturbing footage appeared. Urban warfare, snipers targeting water-gatherers, bombed hospitals, child soldiers. They use their own offspring as combatants. The Zithar's scales turned horrified white. In some conflicts, yes, Viltax answered, devoid of academic distance. Footage of ethnic cleansing, mass graves, detention camps followed. The hive-mind cadet disconnected half their neural cluster. This cannot be representative, insisted an astrolabe cadet. This must be anomalous. Unfortunately, Zactor responded, these patterns repeat across their history. Finally, images of humans using projectile weapons in their own schools, juveniles fleeing. They attack their own learning centers. The question was a collective gasp. An exilian cadet stood, trembling. I withdraw from this course, they announced. Another rose. I also withdraw, said the mechanoid. My algorithms cannot process this irrationality. Nearly a third of the class declared withdrawal, the psychological impact reaching critical mass. Icklithmore raised a placating tendril. Your reactions are anticipated. The Zithar's scales flashed angry red. You subjected us to this intentionally. What educational value? The value, Zactor cut in, silencing the room, is in understanding what we face. We face, echoed the Quidian empath. These humans are quarantined, they're no threat. Silence fell as the instructors exchanged glances. Unless, the Vulcan said quietly, they're not quarantined anymore. Viltax sighed, his breathing sacs deflating. This course is dismissed. Those wishing to withdraw may file documentation with the registrar's office. As cadets rushed out, some composing resignation notices, the blurb cadet oozed closer. They're coming, aren't they? Humans are joining the Confederation. Zactor regarded them with respect. Report to my office tomorrow, cadet. Perhaps you're suited for diplomatic security. The classroom emptied, leaving the scent of alien fear and the hollow projector displaying Earth, tiny and blue, deceptively peaceful. The administrative wing resembled bureaucracy's monument to itself. 47%, muttered Dean Krillix, a Thoraxian whose horn array drooped with stress. 47% of third-cycle cadets have submitted withdrawal documentation. The board demands explanations. In Krillix's ostentatiously large office, Viltax, Zactor, and Icklithmore faced their superior. The course fulfilled its function, Zactor stated. Better to lose them now than in diplomatic contact situations. That's not the point, Krillix's mandibles clacked. This institution has an 89% graduation rate for 7,000 cycles. What will this do to our rankings? Icklithmore's cranium pulsed with contempt. Perhaps institutional prestige shouldn't be our concern when preparing for first contact with a species that developed nuclear weapons before space travel. In the courtyard, rumors spread. They've been approved for Confederation membership, insisted the blurb cadet, now an information broker. My sources are impeccable. Impossible, countered an Axaran, eyes reflecting kaleidoscopic patterns. They'd need centuries of ethical evolution. Unless, the Vulcan interjected, the Confederation needs them. The Zithar's scales cycled disbelief. What could the Confederation need from creatures who commit atrocities against their own kind? Warriors, the Vulcan said simply. In a secure communication chamber 3 levels below, Zactor stood before a holographic projection of Admiral Kuxt, Supreme Commander of Confederation Defense Forces. The Admiral's tentacled visage filled the room, bioluminescent markings indicating secrecy protocols. The psychological impact assessment was accurate, Kuxt inquired. Precisely, Zactor confirmed. Half withdrew immediately. Another 20% show distress but haven't resigned. The remaining 30% are requesting more information on human methodologies. Several want diplomatic security tracks. Perfect, Kust's eye cluster gleamed. The true purpose of the exercise remains secure. None suspect the selection protocol, Zactor paused. Though one cadet, a blurb, classification 7C, showed unexpected insight. Monitor them closely, Kuxt ordered. Recruitment potential. Meanwhile, Viltax was cornered in his office by agitated cadets. You engineered this, accused the mechanoid. This course was designed to trigger resignation. That's preposterous, Viltax stammered. Yes, Icklithmore glided in, her cranium pulsing annoyed resignation. The course was a screening mechanism. Congratulations, you've passed the first test. The cadets froze. Icklithmore, Viltax sputtered. Security protocols are modified, she interrupted. Admiral's orders. In the administrative hall, Krillix addressed staff. Recent developments necessitate curriculum adjustments, he announced, horns stiffened with gel. The withdrawal rate is a successful recalibration of our candidate pool. Information terminals activated, showing a diplomatic ceremony. Confederation representatives alongside humans in formal attire, dated 3 months ago. By executive order, intoned a voice, Earth has been granted provisional membership. Integration protocols are in effect. Chaos erupted. In Zactor's office, a small group of cadets, Blurb, Vulcran, and the formerly arrogant mechanoid, gathered. "Congratulations," Zactor addressed them. "You've been selected for the Interspecies Diplomatic Security Initiative. Your first assignment begins tomorrow." The door opened, revealing 3 humans wearing Confederation insignia modified with Earth symbols. "These are your new combat instructors," Zactor announced. "Veterans of human special forces." The tallest human stepped forward, eyes reflecting unimaginable conflict yet determined. "The galaxy is changing," he said. "There are threats beyond the Confederation's experience. We've fought our own kind for millennia. Imagine what we can do against a common enemy." The Vulcran nodded. "You didn't join for peace." "Oh, we did," the human replied with a humorless smile. "And we've learned that keeping peace sometimes requires doing very unpeaceful things." Outside, the nebulae danced, beautiful and violent, not unlike the species that had joined galactic civilization, bringing the terrible gift of fighting against impossible odds, because they'd been doing it to themselves since they picked up stones as weapons. Half the Academy's cadets had learned a lesson. In a galaxy of wonders and horrors, sometimes the most frightening thing isn't an alien. It's what familiar creatures do when survival is at stake.